If we thought the bullseye was on Texas before, it's on us even bigger now. And so to go into this thing thinking we're not going to get every team's best shot, we're kidding ourselves.
Hello and welcome in. It's always college football. Today is Monday, June 24th, and we hope that you're enjoying the show wherever it is you're getting the show. And we know that we have a holiday weekend coming up. We are very much looking forward to everything that's going on throughout July 4th, but we have a little football and a few news and notes that we want to get to today. We have a terrific visit with head coach of Texas Longhorn, Steve Sarkisian. He's going to join the show. He's been a friend of the show over the years. We're going to talk about the Longhorns of expectations. We saw the writing on the wall last year. A lot of people said, well, no. You can't put Texas in. Texas is always overhyped going into the season. Well, we saw through it. We knew that was a legitimate roster that could play with anybody in the sport, and they did. And by season's end, nobody was playing better than the Texas Longhorns. They unfortunately came up just a little bit short in the semifinal game. If not for maybe a slightly better throw and maybe a slightly better time jump in the back end of the end zone against Washington, they might have been playing the Michigan Wolverines in the national championship. But either way, Steve Sarkisian entering into the SEC will hit the challenges of that change, the challenges of putting together a roster, the challenges of continuing to meet and exceed expectations with a different group of players. So we'll have a great visit with Steve Sarkisian. Visit on the June signing day that has been shelved for the time being, a G5 program that lands a top-tier quarterback and a coaching contract that was given out this weekend. I don't know if I totally understand. So all that here on a Monday edition of Always College Football. But without much further ado, let's dive in. He's the head coach of the Texas Longhorns. He's Steve Sarkisian. Well, Coach, big week coming up this week. You officially jump into the Southeastern Conference. So as far as we gather, there's going to be a concert on Sunday, including a whole rollout on television. It's going to be 108 degrees. Are you going to be rocking a suit during the entire festivities? It feels appropriate.
I feel like I'm going to have a polo on. I think just a kind of simple polo with the Longhorn on it will kind of be suffice. Maybe some shorts.
Yeah, maybe like a white polo because, you just don't want to be sweating too bad. I mean, it's going to be hot out there. It's going to be awesome. But I know that this is something that's been a long time coming. I know it's ceremonial at this point, but you have been preparing kind of your roster to make this transition for some time. So upon hearing this news a couple years back, what changes did you implement over the course of time to make sure that your team is ready to compete day one in the SEC?
Yeah, I think structurally, when we first got here and it was about, okay, what type of team do we want to build? What type of roster do we want to build? I think naturally, when you just look at the history of the college football playoff over the last decade or so, you have to think you're going to have to beat the best team in the SEC or probably the best two teams in the SEC because they're more than likely going to be in the playoff. And so what does that look like, right? We needed to get bigger and more physical up front on the line of scrimmage, offensively and defensively. We had to make sure that we had enough speed on the perimeter and playmaking ability on the perimeter on both sides of the ball. And then we had to make sure that we were athletic enough kind of down the middle of our defense, right? Our running backs, our linebackers, our safeties, to be kind of A, the erasers on defense when those plays do pop, and B, have the ability to have people that can make people miss. And so that was always the thought, and that was how we really started building the team and building the roster. When it was, hey, we're moving into the SEC, I think that the biggest thing was we have to make sure we have enough depth at all positions. And knowing that, man, we are very solid, too deep across the board. So I think that's, having spent time in the SEC, that's the biggest challenge, that it's week in and week out of playing those types of games and not maybe one or two of those games a year, maybe a preseason game and then a college football playoff game or two. And so that's really where the emphasis has gone to make sure that the quality of our roster isn't just top heavy, that we have the depth on our roster, whether it's not just two deep at some positions, really being three deep to withstand what the SEC is. And now more than ever, that shifted when they expanded the college football playoff.
Yeah.
To think that we're going to play our first game August 31st, and we're not going to finish until January 20th. And having the ability to play more games, 16, 17 games, you're starting to look at more of an NFL style season. That has got to adjust, right? The depth had needed to be there, and I think we've done a pretty good job of that. And then also, looking really at practice. How do we practice? What does that look like for the long haul of what this season could entail?
What's funny is I feel like, and look, I won't say the word because I don't want my kids to hear it when we watch this at some point. SOFT, like you hear that word SOFT, and you wonder, and it gets applied to a lot of different programs, right? And there was a time, it's been a long time, but there was a time where people associated Texas with that word. And that, to me, has flipped drastically with how you guys have kind of held yourself accountable and just becoming really, really physical along the line of scrimmage. How does that happen? Because I mean, we always say, well, they just got to get more physical. That doesn't just happen overnight. How do you, coach, make your team more physical over the course of time?
Yeah, I think part of that is I think about who my mentors were in the sport growing up, and having spent nearly 8 years with Pete Carroll and having spent 3 years with Nick Saban and 2 defensive-minded head coaches, and the mentality that you have to have defensively to be really successful for a long period of time. So I think a lot of people see me and they assume I'm just a quarterback guy who wants to throw the ball all over the place. We believe in playing great defense and physical brand of football. And I think the other probably thing that is maybe a little bit of a misnomer is we believe in running the football. And what we do offensively is predicated off of our run game. And the idea that I've never not had a 1,000-yard rusher, and that we take pride in that. And we take pride in team run and going out and running 15 straight plays and there's not a pass and everybody knows it. And there's a mentality to that. So I think that's from the football side, but I also think there's a side to it in our off-season conditioning program and what Coach Beckton does with our guys, even in summer conditioning. We have to be cognizant of the safety and welfare of our players, but twice a week, all summer long, we go out and run in DKR at 4:00 in the afternoon. And that's a mentality, and that our players kind of start to believe in the toughness that it takes to be a Texas Longhorn. And so it's a process that we go through with our guys that the older players definitely take a lot of pride in. And now it's getting the younger players acclimated to that, and what that means for us, not just in the summer of getting through a summer run at 4:00, but how that's going to help us come the fall from a mentality standpoint. But also there's a mental toughness side, but the physical toughness that goes with that as well.
I was hoping when you said 4:00, you were going to say 4:00 a.m. Even though that'd be hard to wake up, I'd still prefer a.m. to p.m., knowing how hot it probably gets in DKR there in June and July. Looking at your roster this year, Coach, a lot of great pieces that are back that we're very familiar with. However, wide receiver has been such a strength and was so predictably good for the last few years, knowing the pieces that were there. To see that group turn over as much as it did is something that I'm really curious about. Now, I love the additions individually you made in the portal, but how did you identify those guys? Because I feel like receivers kind of a dime a dozen in the portal, but you got to find the right guys for the right roles and responsibilities that you want within that room. So how did you prioritize those guys, and what was it about their skill set that led you to recruiting them?
Yeah, so just let's take a snapshot back at our team last year, right? And obviously we know what Xavier was for 3 years in our program, and the skill set and the playmaking and the explosive plays, the ability to take the ball the distance at any time, and the fear that he kind of struck into a defense, the dependability of a Jordan Whittington, third down, the critical plays, fourth down, the toughness he possessed, blocking, and then the addition of A.D. Mitchell last year. And A.D. really was brought in to, he was a great player, but also to take some of the pressure off of an Xavier, to where if you were going to double Xavier, what could this guy do to you in a one-on-one setting? And we also brought him in that the moment was never too big for him. The guy always made plays in the biggest games of his career, college football playoff games, national championship games, and that was exactly how he played for us last year as well. And so losing those 3 guys to the NFL is okay. How do you not necessarily replicate those guys, but how do you make sure that we're filling the voids that they're leaving? Okay, so if you look at Isaiah Bond and you look at the speed and playmaking ability he possessed at Alabama, but also the ability to make plays at critical moments.
Mm-hmm.
The famous 4th down catch at Auburn, that's an easy one to point to, but a huge catch in the Georgia game and the SEC championship game. So his ability to be in those moments and be comfortable in those moments, I think, was good for us. Matthew Golden, super tough, super reliable, great route runner, great hands. So when you start thinking Jordan Whittington, right, and now all of a sudden there's a similar guy with similar traits that way. And he's a guy that played really well against us last year. So we saw that firsthand, 2 touchdown catches. I was like, yeah, he's a problem.
I wasn't going to bring that up. That's just a little too sensitive. But yeah, they had a nice game against you guys.
And then a Silas Bolden, a guy with elite speed, who's I think had 22 touchdown catches now, or touchdowns in the last 3 years at Oregon State, a veteran player who can take the ball the distance, not only as a receiver, but as a returner. And Matthew Golden, great kickoff returner as well. So we were looking for versatility and experience in those guys. And I think we found that. We've been very impressed with what they've brought. But we also have some young players that I'm looking forward to as well. And whether it's a DeAndre Moore, a Jonte Cook, a Ryan Niblett, the addition of Ryan Wingo, a kid who's been very impressive as a young player for us. But that leads itself to, I don't want to go into this season just relying on 3 receivers, because I don't think you can do that over a 16, 17 game season. So we're gonna have to adjust some things there on kind of how we rotate, how we play our players, and probably a few more guys getting a few more opportunities.
Yeah, that'll be a little different. I know last year, I want to say those guys, that Jonte Cook had like 9 catches, and he was your 4th leading receiver outside of the tight end, Jatavion, if I don't, something along the lines of that. So I know you're going to spread the ball around, but you always do, and you do such a great job of it. Defensive tackle, also a position of I don't want to say concern, because that just sounds so negative, you know what I mean? But just knowing what you had, anybody would be concerned knowing that you lose guys that were that dominant and disruptive. So I know you have like the youth that you have there, and some of the guys that were coming up and learning from Byron and obviously from Tavondre. But how has that group kind of collectively stepped up to fill the massive void that were those 2 guys?
Yeah, I think one thing that was interesting about that, people forget that our first 2 years here, Byron Murphy and Tavondre Sweat never started a game, right? It was Keandre Coburn and Moro Ojimo. And then those 2 guys got drafted, and then in came Murphy and Sweat, and talk about 2 guys seizing the opportunity last year of playing a significant snaps and becoming starters and doing those things, that it's kind of ready for that next wave. I mean, I couldn't be more excited than I am about Alfred Collins. I think this guy's poised for a great senior season. I love the experience that a Vernon Broughton brings to us. But to your point, I also love where some of these younger players are at, whether it's an Aaron Bryant, a Jere Bledsoe. We signed a couple really nice players in Alex January, Melvin Hills, that we're looking forward to them. But I go back to, man, we got to have enough depth for what the physicality that the SEC is going to pose us with. And that's how you go and you sign 3 veteran players out of the portal. And we were able to do that this fall, and getting Bill Norton and Tia Savea from Arizona, guys who have played a lot of football there, big physical players, and then getting a Jermaine Lelay from Louisville. Now we've kind of got a veteran group who's played a lot of football at a high level on successful teams and successful defenses, but also knowing I've got some young players that are going to have opportunities to step in. And so, again, I'm thinking big picture on a lot of this stuff. I'm thinking about, when you're playing in December and January and having to sustain, when injuries occur, because football is the sport that it is. And to think that we're just going to come out of this thing unscathed is probably unrealistic. And so I want to make sure that I'm putting our team in the best position to persevere and to be at its best when our best is needed, Thanksgiving weekend and beyond.
And one area last year, and I think it gets a bit of a just because you were so strong in the front seven, people look at the secondary as like, oh, well, that was where you could attack them. Yeah, well, they also had leads, and people
Right.
is becoming a throw-a-thon and all this other stuff. So I don't look at statistically where that group might have had challenges. I look at the young players that came on as the season went along. I look at the fact that in most cases, there were some pretty spectacular plays that were made against those guys that oftentimes had decent coverage, and there were some low percentage throws that were just made by Michael Penix, who ended up getting drafted 8th overall. So when you look at your secondary collectively, knowing that that was maybe a point of contention last year, how much more growth do you anticipate from that group this season?
Well, I'm excited about the group. I think to your point, to watch the growth of a Manny Muhammad last season, to watch the growth of a Derek Williams last season, both true freshmen that played a significant amount of time for us, just how far they've come now. Jahdae Barron and the mainstay that he was for us the last 2 years, and getting him back to 100% healthy is a fantastic player for us.
He's pretty confident, Jahdae?
Yeah, he's a little bit confident. But I'll tell you what, one guy that's back to playing great football for us right now that was actually a starter for us as a true freshman 2 years ago, had a knee injury, and last season was tough on him, but had a great spring, is Jalen Gilbo.
Yeah.
And so where he's at. And then you look at what we're able to do recruiting wise and what we're able to do in the portal to go get an Andrew Makuba, a 3-year starter from Clemson, to come back home to Austin has been a great addition at safety for us. To go get a Javion Cole transfer from San Jose State, to watch the growth of a Gavin Holmes who came to us last year from Wake Forest, not to mention some of the high-level recruits we have, whether it's a Kobe Black, a Wardell Mack, a Xavier Filsamy, a Jordan Johnson-Rubel, and then you have kind of the glue back there in Michael Taft. So we've got probably, in my opinion, this is probably the most talented and deepest secondary that we've had in our time here. And I'm looking forward to watching these guys, because I think the continuity of the coaching staff, them having the same coaches now going into year 4, has been helpful. The communication's better. But I think on the flip side of that, we can help those guys. And I think we did address it with the pass rush. Going and getting a Trey Moore from a UTSA, who's a legit pass rusher, going and signing Colin Simmons, who's a legit pass rusher, the development of an Ethan Burke and a Barron Sorrell, those guys make the passing game a lot more difficult, and their ability to get to the quarterback. And so I do think we've addressed that in a way where we feel really confident in that, man, if we can force people to throw it, that we're gonna create more opportunities for ourselves for turnovers, sacks, fumbles, interceptions, because we're a little better in the pass rush and we're a little better in the coverage back end.
Yeah, it's going to be great. I think collectively all 3 levels of the defense should be outstanding. Looking at the quarterback from last year, it's like, oh, well, Quinn got a haircut. He's a new player. That was a bit of a lazy assessment that we saw all over the place. I know he lost weight. I know he did all that stuff. I know he focused and became more professional with his approach, all these other things. But what specifically has Quinn worked on this year? Because I haven't heard hardly anything, which to me is beneficial. A quiet offseason is not a bad offseason if he's just continuing to grow in the areas he grew in last year. So what has he been focusing on in the last 6 or 7 months?
I think without question that the area that stands out the most is his leadership. This is his team.
Yeah.
And, year 1, you're coming in and you transfer, you're just trying to figure it out. Year 2, I think he was really ready to step into the role. He gets injured against Bama. He's out. He has to come back. He's working his way back. That was year 1. Year 2, he gets that injury against Houston, and then he's trying to work his way back. This offseason, this year, he is definitely much more vocal, much more command of what we're doing, and has earned our trust, quite frankly, and to get us in and out of some things. And but just his command and his leadership with a lot of new receivers, you definitely see that. But a lot, I look back at his season last year. The guy really had like one tough quarter, and that was the first quarter of the Oklahoma game, right? Where there's an interception. That some could say it was a blown coverage, but the corner intercepts it. Then he gets the pick on the tip ball going in in the red area. But people forget in that game, he only threw 6 incompletions. So he really played efficient football for us last year. I thought he played great down the stretch. the Tech game, the Oklahoma State game, and I thought he played really well against Washington. There's a couple of unfortunate plays, but man, he played. He gave us a chance there at the end of the game to go win it. So I think he's poised for a great season, but the biggest thing we see is the leadership for sure.
Yeah, it's. I know that that's something that he had to work on. I know it probably came natural to him, but people just forget too. He was in high school and went to Ohio State, and maybe just lost a little bit of his swagger, and is kind of slowly but surely gotten some of that back. So happy to hear that he's progressing in those areas. All right, last question, Coach. I know you got to get out of here, but it's. Look, the SEC is different. There's no denying that. It's no disrespect to the previous league. It's different. And it's, I think, easy to look ahead and to have games circled and say, oh, this one's a big one. This one's a big one. Georgia comes to us. We go to Michigan. How do you guard against that? And how do you make sure that you focus on the task at hand and kind of take it one step at a time? So we saw what Colorado State did last year to Colorado. They could play. We also know that Michigan game is one that you're excited about. It means a lot, not just for your program, but for the league itself, SEC versus Big Ten. So how do you kind of take it one step at a time, knowing some of the huge opportunities that you're going to have on the schedule throughout the season?
Yeah, I think we have to focus on what is our standard and what is our standard of play, and not to diminish the opponents, but keep the focus on us. And it's made me think about it. I've used this term, be enamored with us, when certain games have come onto our schedule to make sure that we weren't getting distracted by our opponent, maybe in Alabama, right? And focus on what we need to do. But that's really who we need to be week in and week out, and understand what our standard is, playing to that standard, preparing to that standard, having the right mental focus, the right mental intensity to that standard and what that looks like. Because nowadays, if we thought the bullseye was on Texas before, it's on us even bigger now. And so to go into this thing thinking we're not going to get every team's best shot, we're kidding ourselves. And it doesn't matter if it's Colorado State, Michigan, UTSA, ULM, Mississippi State, we're going to get them all, right? And so from that point of perspective is, man, the standard is a standard, and let's go to work that way, and let's hold each other to that standard. And the results of the game will come as they're supposed to come, but we got to make sure that we're doing the work necessary mentally, physically, emotionally to play our best football.
Well, we know you will be, Coach. It's always such a pleasure to visit with you. I know you're having a great summer. Enjoy July. Enjoy what little time off that you're going to have, and I know you'll be ready to roll come camp, and we'll look forward to seeing the season.
Appreciate you, Greg. Anytime, buddy.
Great visit there with Coach Steve Sarkisian, but now it's time to focus our attention on some news and notes in college football. No June signing window is coming, at least at this point. It does feel like it's imminent, but not today. College commissioners, they actually passed on taking a formal vote of moving a high school signing window into June. Now, I'm actually a little surprised this didn't have a little bit more traction, just given how many expenses and how all the official visits that might be stacked up in the summertime. I'm a little surprised. This didn't at least garner a little bit more traction. I felt like doing it in June would make some sense. The problem is you might sign a guy, for instance, in June, only to have them transfer first opportunity that they can in December, and then we're back to square one. And it just feels like maybe you're accelerating the recruiting process a little bit too soon. But I think the June signing window would have been beneficial, because if you look at the coach's calendar right now, the coach's calendar is absolutely unsustainable. And many coaches have started to push back and said, all right, look, we were recruiting around the clock. There were 52 weekends in which we might have to engage with contact with recruits. And then, of course, there's blackout periods. They can't reach out to certain guys at certain periods of time. There's guys that you can't talk to or tamper with because they're not in the portal yet. But as far as high school guys are concerned, recruits could pretty much call at any point and say, hey, I'm coming this weekend. I'm going to go. And a coach is expected to be there. Now, coaches have kind of pushed back and said, well, we're going to take July off. Many assistant coaches, head coaches are taking July off, at least 3 weeks in July off, which is beneficial for mental health. I think it is. At least I think these college coaches get paid a lot of money. I acknowledge that. But they work extremely, extremely hard. And I do think having that little window would have been nice. And to have their signing class basically signed, sealed, and delivered in June would have been beneficial. But I also think from a player's standpoint, there would have been an awful lot of pressure on guys that weren't ready to sign in June. So for instance, I'll just use John Doe as an example. John Doe hasn't played that much in his high school career. Maybe he's played, I don't know, one season. Other guys, 5-star guys, 4-star guys, they've played for 2, maybe in some cases 3 seasons. But by the time they're going into their senior year, they only have 1 season of work at their disposal. And as a result, they have 10, 12, 15 scholarship offers. And most of those scholarship offers are G5 programs. Well, those G5 schools might say to John Doe, hey, you better sign or else we're going to revoke your scholarship or we're going to go after a transfer portal player if you don't sign in June. Well, John says, yeah, all right, fine, I'll sign. So he's signed and now he's stuck. He goes on to his senior year of high school and has a massive season, one of the best seasons in the sport at any position. And now all of a sudden, he probably, had he not signed, probably would have had 30, 40, 50 scholarship opportunities at maybe some of the biggest schools. NIL would have potentially played a factor. And ultimately, because of the June signing period, it really cost John a lot of opportunities. So I'm good with them kind of delaying this, but I thought for coach's standpoint, for the calendar to clean things up, it might be beneficial to move it up, but I'm good with it staying where it's at. I still think December's too soon. I think you do it in February. Why? Because I'm in the media business. I want around the clock conversation, and having it lost in bowl season / playoff season to me is not beneficial for where we're at in college football. So I look at it from that perspective as well. Oklahoma has rewarded Brent Venables with a new 6-year contract extension prior to moving to the SEC. Now, this takes his entire deal up to $51.6 million, and it will go all the way until 2029. Now, I think Brent Venables has done a nice job. From year 1 to year 2, there was massive progress made. My question is, why now? And that's not a slight towards Brent Venables. That's not a slight towards the decision makers at Oklahoma. But what if Brent Venables, just saying what if he enters the SEC this year and it doesn't go as planned? What if he enters the SEC this year and maybe there are some challenges that you don't foresee? Now, I think Oklahoma's going to be pretty good. You guys know where I stand. But was Brent Venables threatening to leave? Did Brent Venables have leverage to go on to the NFL, or did he have other head coaching opportunities elsewhere? Like, what led to this extension? Because I look at it and look, I don't think this is likely, but if Brent Venables goes out and goes 4-8 this year, then guess what? He's on the hot seat heading into 2025, and you might be tied to him and owe him $45 million if you have to let go early of a guy that might not be taking you in the right direction. Now, I say all that and saying I think Brent Venables is the right guy for the job at Oklahoma. But at the same time, I've always wondered why. Nowadays, it used to be back in the day when I was playing and when guys in the last 10 years were playing, it's like, oh, you know what? When a coach has a long-term contract extension, that makes me feel great peace of mind as a recruit because that guy's going to be there for a foreseeable period of time. That's not the case anymore. We just saw Jimbo Fisher get dumped with $75 million on his buyout. We've seen Brian Harsin get ousted after 2 seasons. Like, it doesn't matter how long your contract is. You can get fired at any moment, and you also can leave for another job at any moment as well. So I look at Brent Venables. I think he's at the top of the food chain. I don't think he's going anywhere. So what's the point in rewarding him with a contract extension before you jump into a league that could potentially be a lot more difficult than the league that he just inhabited the last 2 seasons? So I'm happy for Brent Venables. I'm happy for Oklahoma. They have their guy. I just didn't feel like this was necessary. But at the same time, if it makes them sleep a little easier, all for it. Finally, another significant story from the weekend. Memphis has landed the top 3 quarterback recruit in Antwann Hill this past weekend. Now, Antwann Hill's from Georgia, but to think that we are in an era right now where we have recently seen high school 5-star recruits enter the portal and transfer to Boise. In this particular case, in high school, Antwann Hill, a top 3 prospect at his position, decided to go to Memphis. We all know that Fred Smith has made a considerable donation to Memphis's NIL program. $5 million a year over the next 5 years or so, not all towards football, but to a bunch of different sports. This is significant, really significant. And in the event in which there's another round of realignment, maybe Memphis is at the top of the food chain, but also to think what they've been able to do and being able to attract top tier prospects. Now, will Antwann Hill ultimately sign with Memphis? I don't know the answer to that just yet. But even to have this headline, to have a top 3 player at quarterback commit to a G5 program is significant. NIL clearly a huge factor in the decision, as I would imagine, but also at the same time, man, this puts Memphis on the map from a recruiting standpoint. So good for them and good for their coaching staff being able to create a lot of buzz with the player out of Georgia that ultimately spurned Florida and other schools in favor of Memphis. So good for them, happy for them. We'll see what Ryan Silverfield and his coaching staff do as they continue to move forward to put together the rest of their 2025 class. That'll do it for us here at Always College Football. Continue to like, rate, and subscribe to the show wherever you get your show. We appreciate all of you coming to us from wherever platform is that you're coming to us on, whether that's on Spotify, whether that's on an Apple Podcast, or the ESPN College Football YouTube channel. Like I said, continued support and continued appreciation from us for all the love that you've shown us over the years. So please lock it in right here. We'll be back again next week with more content and more great conversations with top head football coaches across the country. So keep it locked in here on Always College Football. So for all of us here, Mark, Jack, Jake, the other Jack, Griffin, I'm Greg. We hope you have an amazing day. And remember, it's always college football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.